All right, welcome everybody to our October members meeting. It's good to see everybody here, and I'm glad you're enjoying catching up with each other. Thank you to all the people who brought refreshments tonight. Look like we're all enjoying that. Please sign up to help. Oh, I think I lost. Hello? Okay. Okay. Please sign up on the sign up sheets over here for refreshments for next month, because we want to make sure we have enough food for everybody. I want to thank Mary Collette and Kay Fox for helping with setup and cleanup today. And I need to let you know we need one additional person. Mary's not going to be able to be our refreshment coordinator after tonight. So I need one more volunteer. If anybody feels like calling to help set up refreshments, it just takes people, you get people to sign up for refreshments, and maybe you send out a reminder notice to those people. Get here a little bit earlier on meeting nights and just help get it set up and clean up. So it's not too big of a job. So if anybody would like to volunteer to take her place, you can see me or Mary after tonight. All righty, I'd like to introduce our, see if we have any new members and guests with us. If you're a new member, can you raise your hand? All right, can you introduce yourself? Scott Maples? Okay, well, we're glad to have you here, Scott. Okay, any other new members? Yes. Karen McKay? And what kind of art do you like to do? All the beautiful art that's hanging. Just want to remind you, we have 12 public places in the community that are displaying our members' artwork. And I want to encourage all who may be interested in having their artwork in one of these places to go on. You can display some of them that just want one piece. Some want 5 or 6. Others maybe want a whole, dozen pieces. So check out the list. We want you first to be eligible for the annual juried show. The prospectus and all the pertinent dates are on the website, and registration will open January 1st. Also, we have volunteer sign-up sheets at the registration desk, and they'll also be online very soon. They're not online quite yet, but maybe within a few days, you can go online to register. Anyway, so just be thinking ahead, because March will be here before you know it. Start planning and figure out how you can help this show to be a big success. So, and lastly, I just want to mention that the board has voted to make a couple changes to our constitution, one that clarifies the wording of when the board meets, and the other change was about the late fee for renewal membership dues received after September 30th. So you'll receive just an email in the next month before the next meeting regarding the changes, because the membership will need to vote on these changes at our November meeting. So this is just kind of a heads up. So are there any other announcements from the floor before I turn it over to Lainey? All right, I'll turn it over to Lainey to introduce our speaker.
I want to make one announcement right before we start, and that is when you sign up on the sign-in list, we use this list to say who's been here for each time, so you get credit to be able to be a member in good standing. So if we can't read your name, then you might not get credit for it. So don't in this, I should have put on here print only. I'll try to do that for next time, but print your name just so we can read it and give you credit for actually being here. Okay, thank you. And if you've forgotten to sign up, anybody forget to sign up? Who else? That's okay, Bobby, if you want to sign it and then pass it back that way. Yes. Somebody have a pen? Do you need me to get you one? No. Okay. And then I know somebody in the back row hasn't signed in, so. Okay. I want to introduce to you all Michael Story. Michael earned a BFA in Fine Art from the University of South Carolina in 1975. He later traveled to New York, studying pastel and oil painting under internationally known artist Daniel Green. Today, Michael Story is an award-winning artist and member of Oil Painters of America and the Southeastern Pastel Society. He guest lectures, curates art shows, and regularly teaches oil, acrylic, and pastel painting throughout the United States. Story has conducted workshops at such prestigious art centers as Huntsville Museum of Art in Huntsville, Alabama, Hudson River Valley Workshops in Greenville, New York, John C. Campbell Folk School in Brasstown, North Carolina, Winslow Art Center in Bainbridge Island, Washington, Art of the Carolinas in Raleigh, North Carolina, Peninsula Art School of Art in Fish Creek, Wisconsin, and Creole School of Art in Winter Park, Florida. Students also travel from around the country to attend his two-day painting classes in his Lexington, South Carolina studio. Story has work showcased in the Bush Presidential Library in Houston, Texas, and his paintings have been reproduced by major publishers such as Canadian Art Prints of British Columbia and distributed worldwide. We are privileged to have Michael Story with us tonight. Have all of you received the handout? Is there anybody that needs one? Okay. Michael, we're really excited to have you and hear what you have to say tonight. Thanks.
Get my tools ready. See. We're already messing up. Okay, I'm gonna, oh, thanks for coming, by the way. And is this working? Too loud, too soft, is it? Okay. Yeah, I see familiar faces. I know some of you, and I've had some of you in my classes, so it's good to see you and good to see everybody else. I guess what I'll talk about, and I'll start with saying way long ago when I started painting, I was really painting watercolor, I guess college age and after college, and I was illustrating and looking back at that time, you know, I chose watercolor because of the deadlines and having to get work turned in on time. You know, you didn't have the luxury of waiting on your oil paint to dry. And I realize now that I'm painting in pastel and oil that I really didn't enjoy the watercolor experience because I'm painting it and it's drying in front of me and I'm trying to hurry up, get this dropped in while the sky's wet, you know, and then I'm looking at my watch. I gotta get this to the ad agency tomorrow, you know, and that's what I did for a living, but I really realized there was no joy in it, you know. It was just what I was doing. And when I got into pastel and oil, then I realized this stuff dries slow, where pastel never really dries. So, you know, I can take my time and think my way through a painting. So I think when I switched from watercolor, I finally, you know, tapped into whatever brain I've got up there and started thinking, trying to think my way through the painting instead of just relying on some sort of technique, you know, to get it done. And I realize now that I probably paint almost slower, but I'm not correcting things like I used to, you know, when I was doing watercolor, I was always doing something and then have to throw it away, start it, you know, it was always something going wrong, you know, and you couldn't really correct with watercolor. Now I find that pastel and oil, it's actually a joy. You know, I can stop, make a sandwich. I can play some music, you know, I can go feed the cat, whatever, and I come back, the painting is still there. It's not half dry now, you know. So anyway, but when I got into oil, looking back, I really didn't, when I was painting in watercolor, I don't think I really was studying color, and I was just kind of winging it and just trying to go intuitively. I thought I understood how to mix color, and I thought I knew enough to do it, and I didn't really need to study. And then I realized when I got into oil, And I think I was always afraid to paint in oil because, and I realized when I started getting into it, yeah, I was afraid to paint because I didn't understand white, how to mix white in my oil. And I didn't know if I should use black or not, or, there's just these things that I took for granted. Paint with watercolor, you got the white of the paper, you don't have to worry about that. And now I thought, well, what do I do with white and what? And then I started reading a little more about it. And then I'm reading things about complementary colors. Well, complementary colors, what is that exactly? And analogous colors. Well, what's that? What? So I'm studying and reading and realizing that I got a lot to learn. This is a whole nother ball game, painting in oil. And so I started researching it and started reading about all this stuff, and then I realized I got to make some charts. So I made these charts, and I've taught some color classes. Some of you may have taken those color classes that I've taken from me before. But I did these complementary charts, and okay, so what I realized is, I have like a cool green, permanent green light, and alizarin crimson. So I thought, okay, everything opposite the color wheel are complements, right? You got green and red, blue and orange, purple and yellow. So I thought, okay, I'm going to paint it and put a little bit of color in each square and meet in the middle. So the middle should be what those two colors give me. And I was trying to create interesting color without making mud. And when you paint watercolor, everybody knows about mud, right? So I started these charts, and the top chart I would do just taking color right out of the tube, one next to each other, meet in the middle. On the bottom, I put some white in it. So I thought, well, now I get to see what happens with the white, how it cools the colors. Color either goes toward yellow or goes toward blue, So I'm realizing, well, this is really kind of taking it toward blue. That white changes the color temperature of it, and it also cuts the intensity of the color. So I started learning about that with these color charts. This one here, the bottom one, it's a warm green and a warm red, cadmium red light. So I'm starting to see the difference. You get a little more brown tones in there because the alizarin is dominating that top one. Here you're getting a little earthy to it, and then you put the white in there. And so by doing these charts, it really forced me into seeing what these colors will do and the effect of white. So I kept these on my studio up on the wall for several years. And then after that, I started doing some charts on lightening and darkening colors, So I really forced myself to sort of go back to school with this stuff so I could learn. And so, after I got those charts done, I started painting. I started really thinking my way through the paintings. I thought, well, I'm going to have a plan for each painting I do. I'm going to try to follow the color plan and understand what I'm doing instead of just throwing color up there and hoping it works out, So I was taking a kind of a scientific look to it and viewpoint to it. And I really realized the more I delve into this, that there really is a science to this stuff, and there's some real rules to it. And if you understand that, it makes the painting process much easier. So what I did tonight was I took these color charts, and then I took some paintings that I painted as examples of those colors. So here I've got a good, strong, cool green with this alizarin. So here's a painting that I did with that in mind. And what I've started understanding too about this is when you use a complement, usually the best thing to do is to have one of the two colors the dominant color. So in this one, I've got the reds are the dominant, and the lavenders are not quite as important. It's important in the painting, but if you put two colors equal dominance in a painting, it doesn't work as well. So one usually needs to take the lead, and the other is more of a supportive color. So that's that painting. Then I started messing around with these. This is a pastel. I started doing some of these tropical birds. And the same thing where I'm letting that red really dominate. And then the greens are a little more of supportive color in the background. But, and one thing I've learned about red too is red almost out of the tube is light as it's going to get. How many of you put white in your reds and been disappointed? You get this kind of mealy mouth pink, right? And so what you have to do with red is surround it with other colors to make it look sunlit or saturated. So I put those dark greens behind his head, and then I used more of an alizarin on his lower body, but that head is almost red out of the tube. It's almost cadmium red light with maybe a little cadmium red medium mixed in. And I always add the white last. Sometimes I think white is going to be needed, and I'll mix the colors, and then I find that, well, I don't really need white in there because white kills that intensity. So if I can accomplish it without the white, that's what I do. So here's how I did that piece, just to show you. Some of these I'm showing you step by step. So let's start with a charcoal drawing, really to kind of get a toned version of it. To me, it makes it much easier to place the color, when I've got the values in it. Because you can paint any painting, any number of colors, but you want your values to be correct, right? So there's the first step. Then I'm putting, any of you know me or taking classes, I like to use red as a wash, and I use that to try to get a glow to the piece. I let pieces of that red show through. So there's the charcoal drawing that I spray fixed, and then a red wash on top. So I'm developing the bird, and then there's the whole piece. Here's another piece with bright red and I'd say cool green, so it's follow along the same as that last piece. So I tried not to get the greens too green to compete with the bird, so that the colors of the bird were really intense. And here's how that one went. So I've got the charcoal, and then you see I've got a red wash underneath. And I'm developing the colors of the bird. There's the final piece. And I dropped little red berries in there at the end. I felt like it needed that just to kind of pull it all together. That was a pastel, by the way. Now here's this row here. So here's a warm green and a warm red. And then the bottom row is the addition of white to it. So you see how that changes, and it's a little less intense. So if you're painting a painting with these colors and you wanted your eye to go to the focal point, you'd use the top row of colors. And if you wanted to show those same colors in the distance, putting some white in there would cut that intensity, and it's going to drop it back, So you're going to be more apt to look at the full intensity of the colors on the top row. So here's a painting that I would say would follow that same warm red and green formula. This, the reference I had, it had the landmass, it didn't have the sun in it, and it was a daytime reference photo, I remember. So what I had to do when I put that sky in it and then the water, then I had to make sure the green wasn't too strong. I had to make the green more of a late in the day color. To me, if that green got too strong, and this monitor is probably brighter than what I've got on my iPad. I think everything's a little brighter here, but if you can imagine the greens, if you get them too bright, too green, it doesn't look like that time of day. So I try to let the reds dominate, and then let the earth tones and the greens, support that. Here's another piece where this one, there's more greens in it. The reds are more the accented part. So I tried to place that red right by that bright green to try to really draw you right there in the painting. And here's how this one developed. There's a charcoal, and you see the red underneath, and then I usually go dark to light. So the darkest colors would go first, and then as I move to the next color, it's always the next darkest color. A little more of the bird, some of the background, and then there's the final. And here's another one. There's the final piece. So that's more, the greens are dominant there. The reds are really the accent piece. So I didn't want to get too much red in there so that the greens would really be the thing you look at. Here's another piece where I've got this complementary thing going on with the reds and the greens. That's a pastel. This is I think it's Magnolia Gardens in Charleston, I think. And here's that last piece I showed you. There's the start of this one. There's the red wash and some of the dark greens. Putting in the color. More of the color. A little bit more. And there's the final. So now moving into the orange and blue. So here's a cool blue, ultramarine blue with orange. And then the bottom row is an addition of white. Changing it a little bit. So here's a painting that I would say would follow that same blue and orange scheme. It's a photo I took of a cloud, and then I did a oil painting of that. There's a painted version of that I painted. And here's how that started. So I still tried to break that down into shapes in the black and white. So in that cloud reference, I tried to look for the slightly different variations of color in there. And I tried to separate it out and draw it out. There's my red wash. And so when I started at this step, the darkest piece, that purple blue, went first. Then I started the transition to sky from dark to light, from top to bottom. And then, like, this is where I would say I would stop at the end of a day if I want this to be my underpainting and I want this to dry. I like to let these first underpaintings dry, and then so I'll put in liquid or galcid to speed up the drying. I'll come back the second day if it's dry, and then I'll put the final color over it, because I feel like then I can really experiment and be free with that last layer of color, because I've got this dry underneath. So if I mess up the top layer, I can wipe it off and I've still got that, so. But when I'm doing this stage of this painting, I'm trying to keep those separated areas of color. What I like to call it, I try to keep the integrity of those different areas of color. So I don't want to do a lot of blending at this first layer stage. There'd be plenty, when that dries, there's plenty of time to blend after that. So I'm trying to keep the yellows, the oranges, and the pinks and all that separate, and I'll soften where the two colors meet, but I don't want to I'm trying to resist the temptation to blend the life out of the thing at this stage. I'm trying to let this be, and then I can come back on it, and I've got that first layer underneath there, intact. So that's what I find. That's a good studio technique. If you're going to paint plein air, of course, you don't really have the luxury of letting that first layer dry. You're really going to the finish with a plein air, but these are all studio paintings. So here's another orange and blue complement. Now, it's the same cadmium orange, but I'm using composed blue, which is kind of like a cerulean turquoisey blue, and it's probably deeper blue on that screen than you see. What this is more the color of it here, but anyways, so it's a warmer blue than the previous one. So then there's a painting that I would say follows that same scheme, orange and blue. Here's another one. So this one, for instance, the orange is the dominant color. I didn't want to get too intense with the blue, so I'm trying to let that orange be dominant and let the blue, support it. Here's a Sedona painting I did that. So the orange is the dominant and that blue. In fact, I remember when I painted this painting, I had the sky too blue. It was almost like a royal blue. I think that's how it looked at when I was out there. But when I had that sky painted in there, it was fighting the orange. It didn't have a dominant color. So I reworked the sky and made it a little more powdery, a little bit lighter, a little more turquoisey to let the orange be the dominant, the rock. Also, I remember that when I was out there in Sedona, those cactus were about this small. And I saw that scene and I thought, I want that cactus to be a important part of it. So I remember I got down and I had my face on the ground. I was photographing the cactus so it looked big, you know, so when I painted it would look like it was a big so, and here's another complement with orange and blue. And also in this one, I try to throw in, you know, I've got some lavenders in the sky and then that complements with yellow. So sometimes in the paintings, I'll try to drop another combination of complements in there to create more interest in it. So, okay, and here's how that one starts. So there's the charcoal. There's the wash. I'm starting with the darkest, the shadow colors first. And that's getting close to where I'd be at the end of the day, you know, where I'd want to dry. But I'm still, you know, I'm trying, like for instance, so those colors of the clouds, I'm really trying to resist the temptation to blend. You know, I'm softening where the colors meet, but I don't want to take that kind of salmony color and the yellows below it. I don't want to blend like a madman that first day and then I got no color. It's just somewhere in between that doesn't look like anything. So I'm trying to hold myself back, not blend on that first day, let that first layer dry, and then I can blend and finish the painting. That's the hardest thing because I think we all want to take our paintings to a finished stage right away, right? And here's another orange and blue combination. I think that's a Colorado scene. And here's a Lake Murray piece. So that what I would say, you know, the orange is dominant and kind of that blue gray. It's a little more purple looking on the monitor, but the orange is really the color I'm trying to let pop and be the focal point of the painting. And here's a pastel of Hunting Island, and so the orange tones I kind of exaggerated a little bit in the sand, and pumped up the orange in the tree trunks a little more. And I'm trying to push the color, I guess, to maybe like 110%. You know, kind of like when I see these scenes, I want to paint them so they're an ideal color. Maybe it's not quite what I see, but to me, I think if you take it beyond 110%, then it's like animated. So I don't want it to be a cartoon or have the colors so strong that it's not believable, but I'm trying to take it to a point where like that's the way I wish it would look all the time, you know. And there's another, so I was thinking again in this, you know, I'm letting the orange dominate. So I'm trying to keep my blues a little powdery, you know, not get too carried away with the blues so the orange can be the dominant thing in the sky. And then I've got that piece of purple I put at the bottom of the sky, and then I complement that with the yellow above it. So I think sometimes if you can get those two sets of complements going in the same painting, I think it makes for more of an exciting image. And there's another orange and yellows are the dominant, and so the blues would be a little more powdery. The lavenders would be a little less colorful. And that's an oil. Yeah, so here's the purple yellow combination. So you can see that I put a lot more white in that bottom row to really see, you know, how much a lot of white would affect that. It's amazing with yellow and violet what colors you get in between, you know. And when you add the white, then you get into some really interesting colors. But I'm trying to create neutral colors that are not muddy. So even though you have a brown, maybe I don't see it as mud. You know, I still see it as an interesting color. I think if you start with the two complements, you're less likely to get mud instead of just trying to mix an earth tone color, you know, from scratch. So there's a use of the lavenders in yellow. So the yellow, I would say, you know, that's the dominant color. Lavender at the top. And usually what I find is when I paint these scenes, if you have a colorful sky, almost always, not always, but most of the time, the colors are not as saturated in the water. You know, colors tend to be a little less saturated when they're reflecting. Now I've seen examples where it works the other way, but most of the time, and paintings I see people do that I don't think work as well. They've painted the same color in the water as they've painted in the sky when it's reflecting. You know, let the sky dominate. You know, next time you're looking at water, I think you'll see that usually there's very few instances where that saturation of sky is that strong in the water. But I think we just get used to looking at a scene and we don't think about it. Like I'll take reference, turn it sideways or upside down, and then you really see the difference between what's in the sky and what's in the water. This is a pastel in my kind of bird series. So again, this is complements of yellow and violet. And here's how I did that one. Here's the charcoal, the red wash. Starting to lay the color in. More color. There's the finished. And there's another violet yellow combination. So the yellow is much more dominant. And I wanted to just put, and again, I think this monitor is probably stronger. I noticed that when I was setting this up today. It's a little more intense than these paintings are, but I think the relationships, you can still see them. But when I put the color in the waves, I wanted to add more lavender than the actual scene was. So I want to make it interesting, but I didn't want to make it too crazy where it's too purple, you know. But I think if you get the combination of complements in the right relationship, it can make for a good painting. This is a pastel, and this is an oil. So again, I would say the yellow complements with the lavender cloud, and the orange in the sky would complement with the blue in the upper right. Let's see that you can see this is probably the real color. There's a difference, right? That thing is much more saturated on the screen. And there's how I did it. There's the charcoal wash. And I've started the darkest blues and greens first. And that's almost done. And then there's done. A lot of times, see the edge of the tree line? At this stage, I realized that it's too flat looking. I knew it was going to be flat because I wasn't really blending much yet. But that tree line, it's too crisp of an edge and it comes forward. I wanted to push that back a little bit. So look at the difference when I just softened that top of the tree line. I think that gains some distance in the painting. You know. And here's another several complements going on. This is an oil painting. You got the yellows and the lavenders and the oranges and the blues. I knew I needed music with this. Yeah. And then here's another yellow with some lavender. I remember this one, I found a separate reference for the sky, but that was another daytime shot of that marsh. I think this was down at Hilton Head area. So I had to try to darken the landmass to what I thought would be correct for that sky. And that's kind of fun, I guess, from my old illustration days when I had to create all these crazy things. I like to challenge myself. If I find a sky and it's just the sky, well, how can I put it in a painting? I've got this other reference of marsh or river scene or something, but you got to be thinking, well, you got to get the light sources have to match. And then you got to figure, well, this landmass was maybe shot at 2 p.m, and that sky might be, 8 o'clock at night. So I've got to make that landmass match. You don't want to do a bad match, and then everybody goes, I know how he did that, and he didn't do it right either. It didn't match. So, but there's another, this was a pastel. This was more compliments. Lavender yellow, red, orange, and blue. And I would say this is like a yellow dominant piece, and then there's, that reference there, that cloud wasn't quite that lavender, it was more gray, but I was trying to push it to that 110% thing, to make that little piece of cloud maybe a little more colorful, a little more interesting. But then I remember, I think I just had that sky reference. I didn't have any water reference of how it would look reflected in the water. So I had to imagine, okay, now I don't want that yellow as yellow in the water. And I don't want those blues and violets as colorful in the water either to make it look convincing. So that's what I came up with. And okay. And also I'll jump up forward to this. A lot of talk about color and I'm going to go into this analogous in a minute, but then there's some times where you just don't want to deal with color. And like if I've painted a couple paintings that are colorful or had a lot of color challenge, then I like to do these, what I call limited color pieces, where I might just give it a tone, a slight tone. So it's not just a black and white, but I like this one, has a slight green. I don't know if it's showing up on this. Yeah. But this was the Saluda River. So it was a pastel, and I wanted just to give it a little gray green, just enough color to make it interesting instead of a pure black and white. This was a pastel. I wanted to give it just a little lavenderish cast, slightly, but another one's kind of the matching pair, and you can see that just a little tease of kind of pale orange in that grass. And this river scene, it's a pastel and charcoal. Again, a little greenish cast, just a little bit. So I took charcoal, did the drawing, and then I took some different kind of earthy, gray green colors and worked on top of it to try to just give it that little bit of a tone. And the same thing with it. This has a little green cast. This is the pastel. And then this is the lighthouse at Hunting Island. So that was funny. I taught a class in Beaufort, and when I go to Beaufort, I always want to drive to Hunting Island, when I'm down there. And I remember the class was over, and then it started raining, and so I drove there on a Saturday morning, and I was leaving Beaufort to go to Hunting Island. How many of you have been to Hunting Island? Okay, so it's about 30 minutes from Beaufort to Hunting Island. So it was raining the whole time, but I thought, well, I'm just going to go there. Maybe it'll stop raining when I get there. I don't want to get this close and not go to Hunting Island. When I got to the island, it just stopped raining, but there was this incredible fog, and it was like a Hound of the Baskervilles setting or something. I mean, it was probably 11 in the morning, It was the spookiest time I think I'd ever been on the beach. And it was hardly anybody, I guess because the weather was what it was hardly anybody walking the beach. And it was really, I was just enthralled with the whole thing. I was walking around and it looked like maybe like the gray man from Polly's would come out of the trees or something, you know? And I was taking all these shots. I was thinking I was going to go down there and get nice color and, you know, and try to do some colorful paintings down at Hunting Island. And I got all this mist and fog and all that. So I've done several pieces of it. So that worked out good. In fact, I was going to try to go up in the lighthouse but you couldn't see anything if you went up there, you know. So I just walked the beach. There was hardly anybody there because the weather was so, you know, funky, you know. So, you know, being at the beach almost by yourself and then having this whole atmosphere. So, you know, I try to take advantage of it and do some pastels. But so that's the pieces that I'm showing here. Now, what I'll do is I'm going to do a little demo, but I'll just talk about, or actually let me just talk about how many of you know when I say analogous colors, is everyone familiar with that term? Or, you know, I mean, basically this goes back to when I was, you know, starting to paint in oil and I was trying to really cement this stuff in my mind. And, you know, everybody understands complements opposite the color wheel, you know, green and red, yellow and purple, orange and blue. But then after that, I started, and I did these charts, and then I started learning about analogous color, about painting color on the same side of the color wheel, you know, and then I really realized finally that if you want to get saturated color and you want your paintings to really have a lot of pop with color, you can accomplish it by painting on the same side of the color wheel. You can take your shadows, say, to the purple side, and then your warms can go toward the yellow, but you're staying away from the colors opposite the color wheel. So then I did this little apple demonstration, just sort of did it for myself at first, where I did the first one. This first one on the left is just using green and red and then highlighting with white, and really which is what most artists did before the Impressionists came along. If you go to museums and look at paintings, they're very muted, colors are very muted. You know, the artists were using complements to shadow their colors with. So what I did, I took that red apple shape and then I shadowed it with green and used the opposite color. And then I highlighted it with white. So you get that kind of chalky, pasty highlight. You know, the other apple I took the red apple and highlighted it toward the yellow, and then I shadowed it toward the purple. And look at the difference, you know, in the colors. And there's an example when you highlight it with a creamy white and a yellow, it's that color is actually a darker value color than the white of the left apple, but it looks more like saturated light because you're putting some yellow in it, you know. So this is the kind of stuff that finally cemented in my mind how to do this stuff, you know. But I thought there's a lot of science to this, you know, and if you understand how this color works, you know, this color wheel, you know, artists get sick of looking at a color wheel, but you know, I always go back to it, and I think about that when I'm doing a painting. I think about the complements. I think about the analogous combinations. So I guess that's the thing about being more of a thinking artist with the oil, because you got the time to think about it. Whereas the watercolor, I was just throwing it on there and hoping for the best, you know. So what I'll do is I was going to do a demo, just paint those two apples, you know, tonight before I quit. So are we going to keep it there? And you want to move? Yeah, move this out. Yeah. Is that out of the way or what? Okay. Also, I brought my favorite artist apron. Years back, I was teaching at, what was it called? Art of the Carolinas in Raleigh. They had workshops. So every year they gave you a different one. I kept this my favorite one. Eat, sleep, paint, and repeat. You know, I thought that's the one I'm going to wear, you know. So, all right. All right. So I'll paint this complementary one, the top one first, you know, which is really just red and then the opposite color, green on the color wheel. And I'm just going to highlight with white. And the analogous one, we're going to use all these other colors. Okay. So, all right. And what was the question? Yeah, I guess they want to see the painting on the, that's what you're gonna video it live, right? Or, yeah. All right. I'll start out, I'll put the background behind the apple in there. Is it? I think we'll be able to get this done. Yeah, it's just charcoal I spray fixed. Yeah. Right, right. Yeah. So now I'm going to use cadmium red medium and start the apple. Well, I'm trying to, again, break it down into piece of the color, you know. I guess the way I try to look at it is I'm trying to paint shapes and try to forget what I'm painting. You know, like if I see artists all the time when they get into trouble painting trees where they're painting leaf, 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 right? You know, and I think it's because you're thinking leaf. You know, I think if you look at it like shapes of color, you're probably less likely to paint 5,000 leaves, right? You know, but anyway. All right. So I'll put some white in it. Now I'm gonna stop and I'll put a little red in the background too. You see how that some of that red's coming through to try to unify it. So let some of that red mix in with the green. Maybe put a little mineral spirits on it, let it maybe drip a little bit. Oh. And I'll put a little green in with the red for the shadow too. I'm just using white in with the red. So it's gonna get chalky, you know. No, I always use titanium. Is that right? Okay. I don't know. I haven't. That's right. Yeah, I remember she did say that. So put a little bit of highlight underneath for a little reflected light on the bottom of it. So that's that one. So you see you can only get just using red with green and white. I mean, you can only get it so bright. You know, it's not going to get. I guess I should have brought that. So, like if I was doing a painting, say if you're doing a still life, say you had a basket of fruit, or say you had an apple up close, and say it was on a table and you had sunlight, you know, hitting the still life. So you wanted that apple to be as saturated with light, as brilliant as you could make it. You're going to go this next method. But if you wanted some of the, say if you had that same still life, but you had some apples in the distance in the painting and a basket further away or something, then you'd maybe put more greens in it, add a little more white. You want to make it a little more muted, you know, which is going to it's going to put it in the distance, right? So the most contrast you can have, the most saturation of color you can have is going to tend to be a focal point that your eye is going to be drawn to that. So that's kind of how I look at it. If I'm making decisions about the color in the painting, where's my focal point, and then where does the other stuff need to drift off into the background? So in this one, I'll start out, I'll put the background in violet first. The reason I'm using that violet is because I'm keeping, you know, with this apple, you know, I'm going to warm it toward yellow and I'm going to cool it toward the violet. So I'm staying away from the green. You know, this is a totally different situation. See how my basketball is. All right. That 3-pointer. So now I'm going to take, I'm going to start with the first color from violet going this way is the alizarin crimson. So I'm going to take some alizarin crimson, just like I did with this one, where I put some red in with the green. I'm going to put a little alizarin in with that violet to kind of help unify it with the apple. Uh-huh. So what? Yeah, we can't do it. Okay. Tell you what, I brought, well, I'll pass these around too. These are dry. I brought them in case we couldn't do that and you could see them. But let's put some more alizarin up in here. Yeah, these are straight out of, you know, it's just violet crimson, cadmium red medium, cadmium red light, cadmium orange, cadmium yellow. And then I'll make a warm white. I'll put a little yellow in with the white, but yeah, I'm just using them straight out of I'm just trying to really show what the colors will do straight out of the tube, you know. Right. I'll take a little of that violet. I'll start my shadow. You know, I'm of course always going dark to light, so. Whereas with watercolor, it was always light to dark, right? You know? So that's another thing you have to learn when you switch mediums, right? Yeah. All right, so start with the violet. Now I'm going to put the alizarin crimson in and develop those shadows a little more. I'll move to the cadmium red medium. Play basketball. Now I'm going to go to cadmium red light. Now I'll go to the orange.
Before you put the orange in, that needs to stop in a landscape, let it maybe dry before you put orange in, just that stage you're talking about in landscape, where you sort of stop it and then let it dry.
You mean when I was doing that first layer of color, the first? Well, if I was doing it in a two-step thing, like I would probably have it more posterized, looking more separated at this phase. I'm just going to try to finish it, you know, as a blended painting now, so I guess this would be more like how you'd paint plein air versus, you know, letting that first layer dry. Yeah. Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, yeah, I mean, she was asking me, would I be, would this be where I would stop at the first layer, but I'm really painting it differently here. I'm just kind of trying to show how you get more of a saturation of color. I'm trying to do it all in one application, you know, versus those other paintings that were definitely done as a end of first day stage. That makes sense. Okay, I'll put a little bit of yellow in the orange. When you get into the yellows, that's where it starts to be more saturated looking, because, you know, when I look at my paintings, if I feel like they're too muted, like, you know, you start with your shadow color and you're putting intermediate colors on top of your shadow color, right, with an oil painting. And so what I'd ask myself throughout the painting is, are my shadows still there? Because your tendency is to cover up your shadows because you're putting lighter color on top. So throughout the painting process, I'm saying, are the shadows still there? Because that's where you're creating your forms. And so if the colors are getting too muted, usually it's because you need more yellows and oranges and reds in them, you know, even in a landscape. A lot of times I've noticed most artists, and I'm guilty of it too, somehow with oil, we overdo white. White's our enemy, and, you know, and you put too much white in the colors, they get chalky. You know, you try to paint a landscape with green trees, and you mix too much white in the green and you get mint green trees that you don't see in real life, you know, right? So usually if they're getting too milky, too muted, it's because there's too much white in there. And so I try to think, okay, it probably needs more yellows and oranges and reds. Because also when you're painting landscapes, how many times you see a landscape and it's so green, and what is your job as an artist is to make those greens more interesting by putting more color in those greens, and usually that means yellows, oranges, reds, you know, in there. So to me, the worst culprit is that white, and that's when I guess I started to understand that when I first got into oil, and I realized I don't know anything about using white in these colors. I don't even think, even though I painted watercolors for years, because I always relied on the paper being white. I didn't understand that white was my enemy, you know, with oil. But so I always add white last, you know, and try to accomplish it with color. All right. So, I mean, you could take this, you know, you could work on this and try to make it look more super realistic if you wanted, but, you know, I'm just trying to show the difference in the saturation uh, by putting the warm reds, the oranges and yellows in there. It looks much more like color and saturated light versus the muted white version of it. But if you go back and look at paintings like in museums, you really see, look at, you know, the paintings that are dated like, you know, 1850, 1820, 1700. The further you go back, the more muted the colors are, and the more, and you can see they're probably using green and dark olive colors to shadow things, and the Impressionists, I guess, were geniuses, they realized there's all kinds of color we can use, we can use blues and purples in our shadows. Are we running out? Okay. Anyways, if you guys want to, if you want to look at this, these are dry. I can pass them around. If you want to see up close, because I apologize, you probably couldn't see what I was painting from back there. But oh yeah, sure. Does anybody have any questions about any stuff I've talked about or? They were different sizes. Yeah, I apologize for not, I should have described the size too. Some were probably 12 by 16, and then there was a few in there that were probably 3 by 4 feet, some of those landscapes. But so there's a variety of sizes in there. But oh, and the paintings I showed. Well, I brought this too. This might be something that I brought this because this shows a lot of those colors. I was painting a water lily piece a couple years ago, and I just had my standard. I had like a cobalt violet, I had alizarin crimson, and my cadmium reds. And the flower in this painting was really brilliant. And I realized after I was playing around with it that I didn't have the right hues to get that saturated color. So I went down to City Art and I bought quinacridone violet, magenta, quinacridone magenta, rose violet, transparent. I laid all these out, and then I mixed white to see what they would look like going to highlight. And so I do this oftentimes with the painting before I start a painting. I'll pick the colors in the family of colors that I think I'm going to use. And then I'll mix white, or in some cases yellow, depending on the overall color of the painting, just so I can see what is the transition in there. Is this what I'm looking for, And I don't know if you guys do that or not, but I found this very helpful for me to kind of go through this little regimen, little practice of before I start painting the painting. Then you're less likely to have a painting you're going to throw in the trash, right? But oh, the brand, what do I use? Oh, well, I use different. I use Winsor Newton. I use Holbein. I like Gamblin makes really good paint, and I like Gamblin's. I used to use Liquin. Now I was reading that Gamblin is more eco-conscious. They're a company that's known for their products being safer. So I use the solvents I use. I use Gamsol to thin the paint, and then I like to use Galkid to speed it up. So that those paintings I was showing you the first day that they're dry before I finish them the second day, where I'm keeping it, I'm less blending in the painting. I'll put Galkid in there to speed it up, so I have a better chance of it being dry the next day when I get back to the studio. Yeah, like Graham is a good buy for the money too. I think Gamblin, Graham, Winsor Newton's usually on the higher end, anyways, yeah, if you want to pass this around, but I just find I do more preliminary stuff like this, and I do more thinking about the color schemes, which, before I started painting, instead of just going, well, that's a beautiful scene, I hope it works out, I'm just gonna, you know, I try to really have a plan for the painting, you know, as far as the complements, analogous or not. I've used both. I mean, I'm just finally learning to use this one camera that Patsy got me. I got a nice Sony 6000 digital that I'm learning to use that. So you can have more f-stop settings and more, have more stuff, what you want to have in focus, have the other stuff blurred, which I think is a huge advantage with your reference, because you want to paint stuff that's the focal point and up close, more sharp focused, and you want your background to be more blurred, more soft. So if you can get your reference to do that, it's a lot easier. But yeah, I'll just mention one more thing about the reference stuff is I was telling a class the other day about this. 20 years ago, I'd go somewhere like Hunting Island and I'd see a palm tree and it'd be like, click, 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 going on, I'm taking 20 versions of it. And then I thought, well, when I get home, I'll figure it out what I'm going to, now I'll look at it. Which angle is really the angle I want to paint it? Walk around, look, okay, this is the angle. And I'll take a few shots of that at that angle. And then instead of spending more time running around photographing, I'll stand there and study it and look at the shadows. What color are those shadows? What are they really? Because I know when I get that picture back home, it's probably going to look black, right? Because photos, you gain black in the shadows. I'm studying the shadows. How would I mix that color? Is that alizarin and ultramarine, or I look at the highlights. Well, how bright are those highlights? Because that reference picture later is probably going to look, it's going to blow them out and they're going to be overexposed. Shadows get too black, highlights get too white, and then you got to figure out how to do it in the studio later. I think if you study it, you'd be amazed how good you'll get at it. You'll get better at memorizing it. So when you go back to the studio and you're painting from your reference, your brain will start kicking in the stuff that you stood there and looked at, and you'll say, yo, I remember those shadows were a little more purple blue than what I'm seeing in this reference photo. The highlights weren't quite that white. So I think that's a better use of the time instead of having 25 shots of the same thing. So, oh, you're welcome. Thank you. All right. All right.
I have one more thing that I'm going to ask you to do, and we have 3 door prizes here.
Oh, okay.
And so I'm going to ask you to choose 3 numbers from 2 to 55. And so it's
3 numbers?
So first one number, and then the second number, and the third number.
Okay.
Yeah.
13.
Okay. Number 13 is Karen Larrabee. Okay. Karen. Okay, another number, please.
Going up to what?
255, number 55.
Oh, up to 55.
Yes.
Okay. 27.
Number 27 is Lois Neeson. Where is Lois? Is Lois here? Yeah. Ah, okay. Diana, could you hand that to her, please? And one more, please.
50.
Number 50 is Barbara Tusink. Thank you so much again. We really appreciate it. And we have until 8 o'clock to be in here. We got to be out of this room at 8 o'clock. But if you want to come up and talk to Michael when we're done, then we would be happy for you to do that for a few minutes. I think the list has been going around for refreshments for next time. Okay, Harold's got it. If you didn't get a chance to sign up and you want to bring food for next time, please do it at the table. One more thing is don't forget your name tags on your way out, okay? Yes, Barbara? Oh, excuse me, one more thing. I need your attention. So, Michael. Okay. Okay, so Barbara Brothers just told us that Michael's going to be doing a workshop for us coming up in March. So check out the website to get the details, and that'll be great to hear for more.
I gotta
So
come
we
up,
continue.
I gotta come up with the details. Don't I?
There. That would be helpful.
I knew there was a catch.
And our meeting is closed. Boom, boom, boom.